Welcome back. This is Jeff Byers, and this is Andy 150, and I'm going to talk more about lighting and how to show manipulators for lighting to make it a little easier for you guys to light your scene. Alright, I have a bust, and it doesn't matter what you have to render, but the main thing is when you set up lighting, you have to know what render engine you're going to be using to be able to set up the right shaders. And so when you use Arnold, you're going to want to make sure that you select your object, whatever that object may be, and right click on it. So let me go ahead and open this up and just right click over it and go to assign new material and go to Arnold shader, and you can see the types of shaders and materials. Now we don't go through all of these. Obviously we're using game assets, and we won't need to use materials. Materials don't really go over into a game engine. Most materials you have to create in the game engine itself. You can't really move them over there. But textures you can move textures over. So we usually set up AI standard surface for most of our objects. So that's the first thing. You got to know what renderer you're going to use. Once you know what renderer you're going to use, you need to set it up that way. So under render using, you can go ahead and set up the Arnold Renderer. Now if you don't see that, you can always go into Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Plugin Manager, and just go ahead and pick the Arnold to Maya renderer. Okay. So, alright, so now we're going to go ahead and start lighting. The first thing you want to do is go to lighting and just go use all lights. Now it's going to turn black in here because there are no lights. Now if I go in here, show or lighting, use default lighting, there's a default lighting that comes with Maya that allows you to see your objects. Okay, but we really don't want that. We want to show lighting, and we want to go to use all lights. Alright, so I'm going to go to create lights, and let's just start with a spotlight. Okay, and bring that up, and we're going to rotate that around. So let's go ahead and rotate that around and move that back. There we go. So now we can see that we've got our lighting. Okay, now the next thing we can do is point the light. Alright, now when you do lighting, you can also use the Arnold Renderer. So you can go to Render, Arnold Render, and you can use the Arnold Renderer. Now if you just want to set up lights and you don't want to have render on and you don't want to see what the textures look like, you just want to focus on lighting, then you can do it this way. This is the best way. So we have a manipulator over here, or you can hit the T key. Okay, so show manipulator, or just hit the T key. There we go. And now you can set this up to where, if you go to the top view, you can set this up to where it always focuses on the object. Okay, so you just gotta kind of put it right in the middle. Usually you have to go in here and just into the side view or the front view, and that way you can kind of focus on your character. There we go. And so when you move that, you can get a nice idea how that character will be lit. Okay, now if we go with the 3-point light system, let's move that over here like that. We've got a key light on this side, and we want and that's usually at a 45-degree angle. Okay, from the front. Okay, we're at the top view here, so kind of a 45-degree angle. Alright, and then what we want to do, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. So I'm going to go ahead and Control D, duplicate that, move that over here like that. So now I've got two lights. Okay, one is going to be the key light that actually produces a shadow, and the other one's going to be a fill light, which we don't want to produce a shadow. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, you can see that I've got a couple things here. You can see that little blue toggle. I'm going to go one more, and you can see that if I go in here, I can click on this little blue box here, and you can see Okay, now I'm going to click on this guy right here just to turn it off for now. Okay, so I'm just going to turn the intensity off. If I do that, then the other one's just going to show. Okay, so let's just focus on this one right here. Alright, so with this guy right over here, let's go ahead and click on the toggle until we see that little blue box, and this will change the actual cone angle. Okay, alright, so we don't see any shadows, obviously. We do have emit specular and shadows, and we're going to be using ray trace shadows, so those are on, but it doesn't really show in here because it's not real-time rendering. Okay, you have to do that with Arnold. So if you want to see shadows, you're going to have to turn Arnold on, and you'll have to do a different kind of workflow with this. This is just getting the lights set up. Okay, so this sets up your cone angle, and then we have another switch. Okay, that allows you to kind of do the penumbra angle. Okay, which causes the light to get nice and soft. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, all right, let's go back to this, and we can bring that, swing that down a little bit more. There we go. So we got a nice soft light. I'm going to go back over here and just kind of soften that a little bit more, or we can go in like that, but we're going to go out like that. There we go, penumbra angle. Okay, just soften that up a little bit. We'll click on the other light and go ahead and get that set up. Let's see. And we have no intensity, so let's turn that up. So, alright, so this one we have set up to an intensity of 1, and we don't really want that. So I'm going to do 0.5 on that, and we're going to do 0.8 on this one. It's going to be brighter. Okay, so we have a little shadow here, but less of a shadow over here. So I'm going to move this over a little bit more. There we go. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing with this. Just kind of use the gizmo here. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Make that a little bit bigger, and then click on it again, and just kind of soften that up a little bit. Okay, now we don't want to show shadows on this, so with this one you can see I'm in the Control A. If you don't see this, this is the attribute editor for my light. Let's pull this down a little bit if I can. There we go. Bring that up, and you can see if I go down, you can see use ray trace shadows. Now since this will be my key light, I do want ray trace shadows on, but this guy over here I shouldn't. I should turn that off. Okay, there we go. So now you got an idea of how to use your lights. Just a quick light setup. And then the last thing, because when we're working with 3-point lights, we need to have something. We need to have a rim light on the back. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy. And since this doesn't have shadows, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. So Control D, and I'm going to move that behind. Okay, directly up. Usually where the camera is going to be, the light will shine nice, and let's get up a little bit closer to that. There we go, like that. And let's go up a little bit higher. There we go. So you can get a nice rim on top of this head. Okay, and we can turn that off and on so you guys can see how that looks. See how much nicer that looks. Okay. Let's go ahead and we'll do the intensity at 0.25. Okay, there we go. It still adds some light. It's not a lot. There we go. So you can see the difference here. I'm just turning the illuminates by default on and off. There we go. So when I have that on, now I can go in here and play with the cone angle. I'm going to go a little bit, because it's so far away, I can go a little bit tighter on that. And then with this, we're just going to kind of soften that up a little bit. And again, you want to have any shadows on, so turn those off. So 0.25 on that. So we started with an 8 on there, penumbra angle at negative 13.29. And then we've got this one at 43 and 16.78 into the rim light. Okay, so you can see that the key light is the brightest, 0.8, and the intensity is 0.5 on the key light. So we got the key light, the fill light, and then the rim light. Okay. All right. So how does this really look when you are rendering? Okay. So we've got some nice shadows in here. What does it look like when we render? So now's the time that you got your lights set up. Now you can kind of polish the lights by going into either a full render or an Arnold. Now when you go into, if you do a full render, make sure your settings are at the lowest or defaulted. And under commons, if you're doing HD, start with HD 540. Never, when you're just practicing or getting your lights set up, never go up to the highest quality, because you're just wasting your time. I hear a lot of students saying, well gosh, it takes for so long to get my lights done. I go, well, are you rendering at HD 540? Oh no, I'm rendering at HD 1080, or I'm doing 2K. Why in the world would you do that when you're setting your lights up? So always set your lights up at the lowest, or excuse me, your render settings at the lowest resolution, just to check, just to make sure your lights look good. Once they're perfect, then you go up to HD 1080, because the aspect ratio is the same between HD 540 and HD 1080, and 1K or 2K. So if you're doing 1K square, because usually when I do like a sword or a dagger, something that's longer than it is wide, then it's kind of a waste of time to do the HD, because it's wider than it is tall. So 2K squares where I like to be with those kinds of things, and 1K you can just do a quick render. Alright, so we're going to stick with HD 540. So if I'm going to do render, that's what you do for renders. Okay. Now I'm not going to do one right now. And the next thing we're going to talk about is composition. Okay, so with composition, that's super important. I'm going to kind of talk to you about that. So we need to set up our resolution gate. So that's this guy right up here. Okay, that kind of tells us exactly what it's going to render. So if I was going to go in here and do the 2K, let's just say 1K for now because there's the same aspect ratio, then you see that changes. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go back to HD. This is a little easier to see. So there we go. All right, so and the next thing I usually tell students is to get your scene composed properly. So good composition. So I need to have go ahead and do the field chart. You want to center it, and then you want to turn that off, and then you want to do save title and save action. So we've got the save title, which is the inside one, and save action is the outside one. Now they used to use these because of TV, the aspect ratio for TV. We still like to use them, so I'm going to go in there, and really the closest I need to get to doing a good composite or composition, excuse me. That's a composite is totally different. Composition is to get it centered. Okay, all right, the best you can, and give yourself headroom on top and headroom on the bottom. That usually means about a ½ an inch on top and ½ an inch on bottom. So I'm going to turn off the field chart. That's right here. You can see we got a pretty good, decent looking composition now. Okay, and then we're going to go into, now that really is up to you if you want to go a little bit higher. I usually like to go eye level with a composition. Okay, to get the best look, because if you do something like that, it doesn't look as good. You could do something lower if you want to. Makes it a little more ominous. But I like to go straight head on with it. There you go. Something like that. Okay, we could do an Arnold render, so let's go ahead and go to Arnold and render. Now it's going to, okay, so I had to turn my lights up a little bit to actually see the render. Okay, so let's go ahead, and that's what the Arnold render looks like. Let's go ahead and do a full render. See what that looks like. The lighting, there we go. It's a little dark, so, and at 0.8 it wasn't going to work. I'm going to go ahead and queue this light up. So I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to bookmark this light. So I'm going to go to Bookmarks, Edit Bookmarks, and I'm going to create a new bookmark. Okay, you have to be looking through the perspective. I'm going to rename that to be, let's just say medium shot, so MS. And I'm going to click, hit enter, click apply. Okay, you can go ahead and close. Now I can zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to show you the light settings that I ended up having to do with the lights. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the key light, Control A, and that opens up my attribute editor, and I'm going to go into just experiment with this light. I'm going to do a 2 on the intensity, 2, and I'm going to do, let's see, yeah, down at the bottom here you can see exposure. So I need to have these about the same, 4 and 4 at the top here. Here we go. 4 and 4. Okay, and then we're going to cut this in half, so that would be 2 and 2, and then we'll cut that in half, and that will be 1 exposure. Hit enter on that one, and go to the top, and that will be 1. Okay, so with Arnold you need a lot more light intensity for it to show up in your render. So if you bring in a spotlight and you're using a spotlight, remember I used directional lights when I did the can. So if you're using spotlights like this, and I'm glad I'm talking about spotlights because I use directional lights mainly in an outdoor environment. I even do it in indoor because they're a lot easier to light. With spotlights, they're a little more tricky to get set up, but they still look nice. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my shading, or excuse me, my view, bookmarks, and click on MS. That brings me right back where I was. I'm going to go ahead and do my render and see how that looks. Again, I'm doing a full render. Okay, you can see that I've got shadows on this side, which I don't want to show up. I don't want those shadows to show up. And you can see the shadows pretty strong. Okay, we got some dark shadows in here, which is a little too strong for what I want. So this is getting better. I think that looks better than it did. It could still be better than that, but I'm going to go ahead and pop that in. So I'm just clicking that image to go into the image buffer, so I can see what I've done so far. Okay. All right. So let me zoom out here and just kind of fix this light. And we know that it needs to be a little hotter. So let's go to 3 on that, and let's go down to exposure. Okay. And 3 on that. Now it overrides the ray trace shadows here when I'm going in here, and what I can do here is I turn off the cast shadows for this light right here, so I can turn that off. And this light back here is not really doing anything at all, so we're going to bring that up to 2.5 for exposure, and go all the way up to 2.5 on here too as well. And again, we're just kind of tweaking things out, and turn off cast shadows for that one. Okay, you got to do that under the Arnold. Okay, so let's go back to View and Bookmarks and MS. Right, and now I'm ready to render again. Again, I'm doing HD 540, and it's rendering really nice. We've got one shadow, which is really nice. We've got a nice rim light on the top and the back, so that's looking really nice. So far, so good. Now I think we're at the point where we can bring up the levels a little bit more on this side and the key light. So I'm going to zoom out again one more time and bring that light up a little bit more. So from 4, we're going to do small increments, 4.5. Okay. Now it's really not a good idea. I like rendering. My computer's pretty fast, so I don't mind rendering and waiting a couple seconds. It really doesn't take that long to render this. But if you have a computer that doesn't render as fast, you definitely want to use the Arnold Renderer, because that will render in real time for you. Let's bring that over here so you can see it better. Okay. Now I can't move my camera because it'll move this. So, but you can still see what I'm doing here. I'm going to go to View and just get that back where it needs to be. Okay, there we go. So now you can see that you can change your light settings. Okay. I think my light settings over here. So I can bring that up to 5, and it will update for me in real time. Although it does take a little while to update. Let me do something crazy like 8 and show you. Yeah. So it updates pretty quickly. Alright, so I'm going to do 5 instead. So we're getting pretty bright. But we're pretty close to where we need to be. Either 4.5. I think 4.5 was pretty good. Okay. There we go. Much better. And 4.5 on that one too. So the intensity and the exposure should match the same. Now this is Arnold, so Arnold acts a little differently. Another thing to think about is with the cast shadows, the radius. Okay, so the radius is going to soften that area up a little bit. So let's do something like 5. You can see that really softened that area up. It also gives you a lot of artifacts. It can. Now this scene it's pretty good. It's not too pixelated, so we're not getting too many errors. So I'm going to turn the radius down to something like 2.5. Here we go. And that kind of gives us, and you can see that's kind of breaking up a little bit right there. What we can do is we can turn the samples up to something like 2, and that will help with that pixelation there. I can even go higher than that to something like 3. Again, this is going to drastically affect your render times. Okay, so samples. You can also do let's see, volume samples. But if you go too high on there, it'll really slow you down. So be really careful when you're doing this. Okay, sometimes I can leave that to 1, and I can clean that up by a full render. So you can see that if I click off and I go to a full render, take a look at that real quick. Shouldn't take too long. Right, it's a lot smoother. It's a lot nicer. It's not bad. But what would really fix that is to go into the render settings and go in here and move this up a little bit to 4 or 5 or something like that. Now again, if you see shadow issues where it's pixelated or you see errors in it, turn up the camera AA. That will lengthen your render times quite a bit. Okay. And normally when I do finalized renders where I can walk away from it for a couple hours, I'll do something like 6 and 3 and 3 and 3. Actually, transmission, I really don't need to worry about that too much. And then ray depth, we can bring that up to something like 12. And these are really high numbers here. And then 10 on here and 12 on there. Okay. Now these are like overkill, right? So you'd only do that when you can walk away from it for a couple hours, maybe even 6 hours, depending on how fast your computer is. So just be aware of that. Okay. So, all right, rule of thumb: if you're doing HD 540 and it's rendering in a minute, you're going to quadruple that if you go up to the next level. Okay. So what is the next level? So if you're quadrupling in it, that at the next level, which would be 720, and then you quadruple it again at 1080, that's the time you're going to spend going from 540 to 1080. Okay? So just remember that. Okay. Alright, so if you're happy with the lighting at 540, you're going to be happy with the lighting at 1080. So that's basically how I light and compose my scenes, and more advanced. And you can see that we've got some nice headroom on either side. Now, let's say you don't want to show the stand on there, then you would just go in there and just focus on the bust then at that point. Okay? Alright, so I hope that kind of helps you a little bit when you're doing your lighting. Got to show you a couple new things, and I hope you enjoy and with experimenting with these types of techniques. And it doesn't matter to me, whatever works best for you guys, whatever you find that works best for you and is faster, then go with that. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video.